It's the Russian claims that there is no push for a regime change, but it's very clear earlier on in the war they were quoted as saying they were looking to help liberate Ukraine from the regime in place. So the question is now, why has it changed? For Putin, it's evident the war is not going the way he had planned at all. It's clear that Russia is having to revise its objectives. It looks most likely this claim is more for a domestic audience in Russia than it is for us, so no real change. But I certainly wouldn't expect any letting up in the campaign. Zelensky is still under a lot of pressure and a lot of danger.
And we've seen it with Kherson, which was liberated just last week, but already people there are being advised to leave. What's going on there?
Yeah, there's a lot of talk because of the blackouts, because as the winter approaches, life is becoming really difficult. Picture of some of the evacuations happening just from last night. And the Russians are doing a devastating impact across the whole of the energy infrastructure across Ukraine. And the Ukrainians are offering free opportunities for the civilians to evacuate. Part of the challenge, though, question is why focus on Kherson? Because the whole country has been hit by the same challenges. Part of that, the answer to that is that whilst the Russians have been ejected from Kherson, they are just the other side of the Dnipro River. So they are literally sitting within artillery range of Kherson. And that means they're still a major threat. It's also the Ukrainians are clearly having a go at, have they paused or are they going to continue their offensive? And if they continue their offensive, out to the north around the top of Zaporizhia, across potentially the Novokakhovka Dam, and also down to the Kinburn-Spit Peninsula. And the Ukrainians have already admitted that they are already mounting operations onto that Spit and Peninsula. Now, that would seem, from a military perspective, really difficult to do because it's quite small and exposed. Why were they going to do that? Because that means the Ukrainians control both mouths of the Dnipro River, and it also means the Mykolaiv and Kherson ports are also secure.
And finally, what about these brimstone missiles that the UK has sent? We sent them today. How useful might they be to the Ukrainians?
Yeah, Brimstone is a really good example of a British, very high-tech weapon that's part of the latest package of aid that's going from the British government. Earlier on in the war, Brimstone 1 was sent off. Brimstone 2 have now been sent off. This weapon only entered service in 2016, so it's one of the most latest we've got. It's got double the range of its predecessor. We understand that's around 40 kilometres. Dual mode, which means that these windows at the front can either pick up laser energy and then target themselves, or they've actually got a radar in as well. And then their memory banks, they've got a whole load of Russian military equipment, and they can prioritise the right equipment they're going for. They can even hit moving targets as well. Ferociously expensive, £175,000 a missile. They've fired about 750 of these so far in operations more generally, and they've got a success rate of something like 99%. Also importantly, unlike the Russians doing this sort of blanket bombing, these things provide precision effect and massively reduce collateral damage. I think particularly interest as well is when the early phase of this war, when Ukraine were on the defence, Russian tanks were attacking, they needed anti-tank weapons of short range. Now Ukraine is going on to the offensive. The Russian tanks are further away. They need weapons with longer range, and that's exactly what it does. But for me, this is a really excellent example of British high-tech weapons making a decisive difference in the campaign.
Yes, I mean, this is just the same as the Russians did when the Kerch Strait Bridge was hit. 2 days later, about 100 airstrikes, missiles and drones all across the country. This looks to be about the same sort of level in places that we know of so far, Lviv, Zhytomyr, Kiev, Kharkiv. Going for critical infrastructure, but also quite a lot of civilian sites. They don't kill so many people, but they certainly dehouse a lot of people. And it's revenge, because that's what the Kremlin wants to show. But it's also part of the domestic argument in Russia. It's to give the Russians some sense that the war is going on, is vigorous, even though the news from Kherson is quite bad. So it's partly a distraction technique as well. And
just looking over the border of Ukraine into Moldova, we're hearing about large power outages in Moldova. That news just coming into us this afternoon, which gives you a sense of obviously how the region is so linked and the danger, not just to Ukraine, but further afield as well.
It is. Moldova has in it a breakaway region that's not declared itself breakaway yet, Transnistria, with a Russian minority. It was the headquarters of the old 14th Army in the Red Army days. Moldova is a very, I don't want to call it unstable, but its stability is always in some doubt. And what happens in Ukraine really affects Moldova. And it's not surprising that their infrastructure is so linked. Life is tough in Moldova as it is, and they're right on the edge of a war zone. It's not doing them any good at all.
Yeah, and they're feeling the effects of those airstrikes and, you know, as you said, the targeting of critical infrastructure. Let's talk about Kherson and obviously the retreat of Russian troops there. But where did those troops go? Talk to us about what's happening around Kherson and further afield.
Yes, I mean, Kherson itself, the Russians got about 30,000 troops out of the area, and they did it pretty well, clandestinely at night, on civilian vehicles. They had civilian buses, military buses, civilian buses, military buses going in convoys. It looked as if they were getting civilians out, but they weren't. They were getting military out alongside them. They did it really rather cleverly. They seem to have got most of the 30,000 out. My guess is they want to send most of those troops up to the Donbass, where they will make some difference, because these are quite good troops that they had there. And my guess is that